Welcome back. Yeah. Welcome back. Hope everybody had a great time out there. What a cool thing to do at a conference is just let ourselves have some free space. I hope that was really fun and inspiring for everybody. It was for me. I'm Jack Algier. I'm the farm director here at Stone Barns, and when I first got here, nearly 20 years ago, I first kind of imagined what seeds might sprout from this soil and from this community, this absolutely beautiful land and preserved space, and the privilege to be able to be on this ground and take care of it. But I could only have dreamed to have such a community here with us and doing what we're doing today. I could only have imagined in my most wildest dreams that we would have so much energy behind what we're doing today under this roof and on this land and in all the places that you all care for. What I've seen today, which is I think different than many years and the years of conferences in different places around this country and in the farming movement as these decades have gone on, today I've really seen something complex and deep that really continues to open. And I'm really grateful that we have 2.5 days still ahead of us to really explore this. We have a lot left, more connections and more conversations to be had. This community is brave and compassionate and dedicated to being a real living example. We are activists in this work. This is a way through farming and cooking and all the different artisanships and writing and storytelling that we do in this work is really, truly active, a way to make change in our world. So for all of you tuning in live stream, I want to thank you for being here with us and extend that to you all. For that, I am grateful. So in this moment, I have the pleasure to introduce our next speaker. Rowen White is a seed keeper and farmer from the Mohawk community of Akwesasne and a passionate activist in Indigenous seed and food sovereignty. She's an educational director and lead mentor at Sierra Seeds. That is an innovative organic seed stewardship organization in Nevada City, California. Rowen is a national program coordinator for the Indigenous Seed Keepers Network, which is an initiative of Native American Food Sovereignty Alliance, a nonprofit organization aimed at leveraging resources to support tribal food sovereignty projects. She's also on the board of directors of Seed Savers Exchange, the largest public access seed bank in North America. She weaves stories of seeds, food, culture, and sacred earth stewardship on her blog, Seed Songs. And you really have to read or hear Rowen's work to believe that it's possible to piece together such language and inspiration into such a gorgeous tapestry of work. And we're so privileged that she is here to share her wisdom with us tonight. She is truly a groundbreaking leader, a mentor, and a guiding light for so many of us working in this space. The first time I met Rowen was back when we were teenagers. We were babies. And I knew right then that she was my sister. Yeah. Our connection was rooted in soil, in community, and in seeds, and she was already on this conscious path. She was weaving her own ancestry and her soul reverence into the fabric of her work and the culture all around her and in our community. Our friendship is marked by a love of land and rhythm and community, and we have shared in ceremony, work, and play, and seen each other's families grow. Her humility and integrity has been a powerful example all around. And she leads with a joy and playfulness and depth in each step. And I've learned a lot in her presence. And I'm grateful to observe her strength of nurturing and as a mother and as a community leader, and to have benefited from her role as a seed keeper, visionary, and friend. So please help me welcome Rowen White.
Thank you, Jack. There we go. Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
All right, I'm the crazy seed lady. I bring my seeds here and really speaking through them, right? They love me at TSA when I go through the airports. I have all kinds of goodies for them to look at. So great. Well, I just want us all to sort of sit here, make sure that your feet are, firmly planted on the ground. Big, deep exhale. We've taken in a lot today, and I just really want us to be present for this moment. In sort of an act of land acknowledgement, I'm going to just do a quick reading of something that I wrote on behalf of my own ancestors and the resilience that they continue to inspire me in my work, and then we'll go forward from there. I would like for us all to take a moment to sit quietly, our feet centered on this good earth, the land that was the convergence of many, many peoples, the Lenape, the Haudenosaunee, the Wappinger. I want to share a few words that honor the resilience of the ancestors of this land, and the living descendants and those yet to come. It was once said, they tried to bury us, but they did not know we were seeds. All the generations of people that came before us, who in their own ways prayed for the sprouting of our deeply connected lifeways again. I return with my beautiful children in hand to the traditional earth-based traditions of our people, the first in many generations to follow, in my bloodlines, to follow the sacred ceremonial calendar, renewing time-honored relationships with all around us, eating our traditional foods, and caring for their seeds. Those ancestors, they prayed for us in many ways, in diverse tongues and in small, humble, everyday ceremonies of patting babies to sleep and stirring cooking pots and sitting in the shade of an oak tree to weave a black ash basket, rowing such baskets across the mighty river to market. They prayed for us in the songs that honored the births and deaths, the planting and the harvests. These prayers of our ancestors, in their own special way, sowed seeds of resilience and vitality that they knew would take a few generations of laying dormant in the dark soils of our hearts, carried down through our blood memory in the rivers of our mother's sweet womb water that's held in our spines and in our veins and in our marrow. 7 generations or more, these seeds of prayers were tucked into the safety of soil, of our underground mycelia of cultural and ancestral memory, tucked deep into the earth that is our own bodies, connected through tributaries of rivers of bloodlines. These seeds are finally sprouting in their own time. These seeds enduring the scarification and weathering of decades of struggles and challenges, and also the joys and the births and the spirit fire of our mothers and our grandmothers' tenacity for ensuring that our lifeways would stay alive amidst the confusion of the last couple centuries. What they endured so that we could be alive here today, tending the many shiny-faced green sprouts of life that they so diligently tucked into the safety of dark soils, hidden from hungry and greedy hands, until generations later they could emerge with renewed vigor and vibrancy. It was such scarification that has given the prayers the courage to sprout into our lives. And me, my children, and my community, we are their wildest dreams sprouting and coming to life, because they tried to bury us, but they didn't know that we were seeds. And I say these words as a Mohawk woman. I come to you speaking my language. Sego seo guego, ganyet dahawe yungyats. My name is Rowen White. I'm Snipe Clan from a place called Akwesasne, which is where, right along the Canadian border, the word in our language means the place where the partridge drums. And my Mohawk name is Ganyet Dahawe, and that means she who carries the snow. As about 40 years ago, I was born into a swirling blizzard, along with my twin brother, whose name is Ganyet Dio. And I was born into a family that has been really deeply impacted by the colonial tools of acculturation and assimilation. And I myself have been on a 23-year journey to really find and tease out those seeds of resilience and remembrance that are inside of my blood and my bones. And the stories that I'm going to share with you tonight, that I have the honor and privilege of carrying here with the permission of my people and my community, are a testament to those seeds of resilience coming to life. And so much of what, if nothing else, that I could convey tonight here is that each and every one of you also has those seeds of indigeneity that reside in your blood and your bones, those original agreements that give you that sparkle in your eye when you open up a jar of beans or when you have your hands in the earth. And so if through the embodied prayer that is tonight and the few days that we have together, if you can find some ways that you can water that seed of remembrance and resilience inside of you so that we can really imagine the beautiful and great turning that we are moving towards. I will share with you this. This is me. This is little Ganyet Dahawe, little Rowen White. Little did I know at that point, growing that lumpy, bumpy pumpkin there that I have in my hand, I was so proud of, that I would be walking into the dreams and prayers of my ancestors. Like I said, I began this journey about 23 years ago. I was 17. And as a 17-year-old growing up in a community that's very much plagued by the violence of colonization, I was really struggling to find my understanding of my place in the larger blueprint of creation. Had a lot of questions about who I was, where I came from, all of these sorts of things. And I found myself in a very unconventional rites of passage, right? At that point in our time, I was born in 1979. In 1978, it was still illegal to practice Indigenous ceremony in the United States. Can you imagine that? In my lifetime, it was still, you could be prosecuted for speaking your language and practicing your own ceremonies, right? And so I was growing up without the aunties and uncles who would help me through those traditional rites of passage. But these beautiful beans and these beautiful seeds landed in my hand at the very right time and place. This man is my great-grandfather. His name's Alex White. He was the last person in my bloodlines, in my ancestry, to farm for a living. Alex, you could see in the sort of weathery lines upon his face that he endured a lot. He was taken away to boarding schools as a part of the acculturation and assimilation tactics that were happening in the earlier parts of this century that still continue on in many ways. And his Mohawk language was beaten out of him, right? He was taught to be ashamed of who he was and where he came from. He knew the land like she was his mother, right? Like he knew that land was the lifeblood and the sustenance of our people. So they weren't able to beat that out of him. When he left those spaces, he became a dairy farmer. Very little is known about sort of the insidious nature of some of the land-grant universities and the way that they would use extension, cultural extension, and those sorts of mechanisms to really teach Native Americans not to farm traditionally, but to assume some of the farming techniques and tactics and mechanisms of the settler colonialism, planting in row crops, raising dairy cows, etc. So he endured a lot, but he kept his connection and his promise to steward that land for future generations. This is my grandfather. And you can see behind him is our old homestead that we still have up at Akwesasne. It's an interesting story, which I'll tell in a minute, but we ended up on the banks of the St. Lawrence River, which is maybe about a 4.5-hour drive up from here. And it's a frozen swamp, and the people there have worked very hard and very diligently to keep our seeds and our foodways alive, even on land that is not so conducive to that. So you can see my grandfather's there with a sheep in his hand. This is a picture that was taken by a really wonderful German photographer named Uli Westphal. I'll be showing a few of his slides in the slideshow. And the reason why I wanted to show this is because the tomatoes are who I owe my seed path to. As a 17-year-old woman, I left my home community of Akwesasne and ended up on a farm in western Massachusetts that was connected to college where I had received a scholarship to go to, and found that I needed to have a work study opportunity, and found myself on this working farm under the tutelage of a wonderful woman named Nancy Hansen, who really took me under her wing and showed me the beauty of a seed sprouting and the amazing healing nature of getting our hands in the earth. And she saw my delight and my love and my reverence for this work. And she put me in charge of this heirloom tomato seed project, where she gave me this basket full of all these seed varieties, fuzzy peach tomatoes, and striped yellow and green tomatoes, and this whole vast prism and rainbow of different varieties. And for me, being a girl from the res, had never known tomatoes other than round and red, and really probably had only known them as in a can, right, or in a tomato sauce. And I remember this was a pivotal cornerstone moment of my life. I was sitting on this dusty farmhouse floor in New England, paging through all of these seed catalogs to find the stories that went along with the seeds that were in this basket. And I remember this mind-blowing revelation that not only did seeds come in this full spectrum of different fruit shapes and colors and different places, but that they also had story, right? And that they also had lineage, and they also had connection to place and to people. And for me, equal to my joy and my incredible, just wonder that was unleashed in that moment when I was sitting there, equal to that joy was this deep wellspring of grief and sadness and longing and anger of being a Mohawk woman. We descend from a long lineage of people who planted seeds and tended seeds. And I was sitting there on that floor, and I did not know the foods and seeds that fed my ancestors. That when I looked at my bundle of the things that had been handed down to be by my ancestors and by my elders and by my parents, that there was a huge hole missing in my bundle of knowledge and of the inheritance that was given to me. And so I made a promise to myself that day, a 17-year-old woman, and I said, I'm going to find out the foods that fed my ancestors, and I'm going to learn those stories. And it's been a 23-year road to really find that, to find that deep connection. And so every year I always plant a lot of tomatoes because they were my first teachers. And over the last 23 years, I've apprenticed myself to these seeds and to these foods as my teachers, as my aunties, as my grandmothers, who would be my mentors in the way that I would find my way home. Joy Harjo, who's the current poet laureate here in the United States, she shares this beautiful words, and she says, "My generation is now the door to memory, and that is why I'm remembering." I set out on the road that fall, and I had gone up to Quebec, to communities in Ontario, and to communities in upstate New York, to begin to ask my elders, what were the foods that we would keep alive, that we would grow? We've all heard of Three Sisters, but what were the shapes and flavors and textures of those foods? And I began to realize that every person that I would sit down and talk to was 60 years old, 70 years old, 80 years old, There was no young people involved in our agricultural work within our communities at that point, right? I met this wonderful man named Norton Rickard, who was Tuscarora. Part of the Mohawk heritage is that we are part of this Haudenosaunee Confederacy, which is a confederacy of 6 tribes. And Tuscarora is one of those tribes. And there was a far-sighted elder named Norton Rickard who'd kept the seeds alive. Now imagine this. These are people who were displaced and, relocated and, the language beaten out of them, but they knew that there was something really powerful and special inside of these seed jars that they kept, lined up in their dusty pantry room shelves, just waiting, planting them diligently and waiting for people like me, the younger generation, to come back around and ask about them, that legacy. The seed work is intergenerational. And when I talk about that doorway to memory, I was meeting people who were sitting on the very threshold of that doorway to memory. And Norton Rickard, very shortly after I met him, he taught me how to braid corn. He taught me a lot of things. He passed away in the night, quickly, swiftly. His heart gave out. And so that whole library of ancestral and generational memory that he held, that he so generously shared with so many people, was gone, just like that, right? So where were the young people like me, sitting on that threshold of that doorway to memory, sitting with our elders and asking them the things that they knew and the things that they carried? And so at that moment, I made another commitment to myself, that I was going to be not only a seed keeper and not only a farmer, but I was going to be a storyteller. And I was going to be a memory keeper for my people, because that's what the seeds do, and that's what we do together, is that the seeds hold this beautiful memory, this beautiful history that's unwritten, that predates the written word, going back since time immemorial. Back to this place, right? Our place of origin. This is a beautiful artistic depiction and rendition of the very dawning of our people on this place, the Ongwehue, the Haudenosaunee people, the Mohawk people. We believe we came from another space and time, another world that we call the sky world. And in that sky world, we gathered and we hunted, and food was plentiful, and there were so many things, but there was a time when a great sickness plagued that place we know as sky world. And there were dreams that were had, and there were prophecies that were given. And the daughter of one of the chiefs in the village was asked, she was a pregnant woman, and she was asked to go to the center of the village and uproot this tree, this celestial tree, this tree of life. And underneath that tree was going to be the medicines that were going to heal the people, that were going to make the people continue to go forward. And as she was told, she reached down into that hole when that tree was uprooted and grabbed some of the seeds and some of the earth from that place around there. And soon she began to drop and tumble into that vast watery abyss that was underneath that tree. And she fell into this space and time that was completely just endless, endless water. Almost like birthing through, the womb, like the birth canal, into this endless, endless watery space. And the beings that were there were the water beings, the waterfowl, the geese, all of the beings that live in the water. They circled around her, and they caught this woman they called Sky Woman, and they captured her on their wings, and they circled around, and they said, what are we going to do with this strange character, this strange woman who falls from the sky? And pretty soon, the turtle comes up from the depths of the water, and she says, you can put Sky Woman on my back. I have a big enough back. I'm strong enough to hold this woman. And so they circle her down and they set her down. And pretty soon the water creatures of the earth say, I think there's some mud on the bottom of the water, way down deep. Let's go down and get that mud and bring it up onto the back of the turtle so that she can plant those seeds that she has in her hand. And so they went down deep one at a time. And pretty soon one was successful, and they put that paw full of mud upon the earth. And our original woman, with those seeds and that earth in her hand, she began to move in a counterclockwise motion, and she began to sing the world awake. She began to sing those original seed songs that my ancestors still carry and my elders still carry. She began to sing the world awake. And when she came into being in this new world, she soon became ripe with this baby, and she gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. And her and that baby girl began to sing the world into more beauty, into more, fecundity and fertility. There was so much beauty on this place called Turtle Island, which is the place where we stand now, right? We're here on Turtle Island. And those vines and those foods began to grow. And then soon the girl came of age, and she ripened into this beautiful young woman. And soon she became pregnant by the ways of the west winds. And soon she swelled very, very big in her belly, pregnant with twins. And as those twins came to term and came time to be birthed, one came out naturally through the birth canal, but one was impatient and cut through her armpit. And in the process of him being born, this baby boy named Flint, the other was Sapling, the mother, the daughter of Sky Woman, she died in childbirth. And as she lay there, her body on the good earth, breathing her last breaths, she said, "From my body will sprout the foods and the sustenance that will keep our people nourished from here on out." And from her breasts sprouted the corn, and from her hands sprouted the beans, and from her belly button sprouted the beautiful umbilicus of the squash vine. And from her heart sprouted the strawberry, and from her mind sprouted the tobacco, and from her legs sprouted the sunflower. And so you'll see as we begin to talk about seeds in this space, is that what I want you to invite you into this cosmological space where we as Mohawk people, we see that we are direct lineal descendants of the foods that nourish us and feed us. That we're direct relatives, that they are our babies. They're also our ancestors. They're the ones that gave their life so that we could have life, right? And each and every one of you in this room descends from a people that had similar stories of that nature, that understood that there was this grand cosmogenealogy of the way that we, humans, the domesticated plants, the wild plants, were all wrapped into this delicious and beautiful interrelationship, right? This coevolutionary dance. And so this is the foundation of our understanding of why it's so vitally important to care for seeds and for foods. Because they're not just dead, inanimate commodities to be traded in the marketplace, that they are our mothers, they are our relatives. This is a map of the Iroquois or the Haudenosaunee nations in about 1650. This cuts off a little bit of what we know now as Canada. Those same dotted lines would extend northward. But you can see that the Mohawk people, my people, were the keepers of the eastern door. Our territories would go down as far as Albany and down into some of the Hudson Valley, and then all the way up into Ontario and Quebec. We would move southward during the planting time, and we would move northward at the time of fishing and hunting and ceremony, etc. But what you can imagine is that what happened here with the displacement of our people is that there was an incredible land loss, an incredible amount of land that was lost to our people. So now we only reside on very small specks of land within New York State, Ontario, and Quebec. And that has had a distinct and horrific impact on our capacity to be food sovereign and to feed our people. I want you guys to sit here and think about the immensity of this place called Stone Barns, in this place called Terrytown, and to think about the bones of the ancestral people, the umbilical cords of the ancestral people here, the blood, the sweat, the tears, the laughter, the echoes of all of those, remnants of life of this place here. Because the story that I'm about to drop into gets pretty heavy before we go back into the light, which is that this land, in part of the Hudson Valley and then into Western New York, was at the crux of some very violent activity at the beginning of the Revolutionary War. And I'm going to read these words that were written actually on order of George Washington, but were then made into orders by General Sullivan in 1779. And he said, "The expedition you are appointed to command is to be directed against the hostile tribes of the 6 nations of Indians with their associates and their adherents. The immediate objects are the total destruction and devastation of their settlements and the capture of as many prisoners of every age and every sex possible. It will be essential to ruin their crops now in the ground and prevent them from planting more. Whence parties should be detached to lay waste all the settlements around with instructions to do it in the most effectual manner, that the country may not be merely overrun but destroyed. But you will not by any means listen to any overture of peace before total ruinment of their settlements is effected. Our future security will be in their inability to injure us and in the terror with which the severity of the chastisement that will inspire them." General Sullivan, 1779. So you can imagine, long before the boarding schools and all of the things that have happened in the 20th century, 19th century, that this was what was happening, that there was a very violent and very specific dismantling of our connection to the land and our connection to the food. At that time, General Sullivan's troops went across Western New York. Why were they targeting the 6 Nations people? Because the 6 Nations people, the Haudenosaunee people, some of our communities were siding with the Loyalists, saying, hey, slow down. We want to continue to have landholdings here. We want to continue to be able to uphold our original agreements to care for this land. General Sullivan and his troops came through Western New York and burned, from the records, 1 million bushels of corn. Can you imagine that? Pre-industrial agriculture of my people producing 1 million bushels of corn that could get destroyed in one season, right? They burnt it all. But there were foresighted elders, and there were foresighted people who took buckskin pouches of some of that corn that had been singed and had put it into their pockets and into their belongings when they fled to the north and to settle in different places that were away from these people who would do such devastating and destructive things, right? They knew that wherever they were going to go, that those seeds were going to be able to feed and nourish the people yet to come. So you can see here, these are our territories currently in the 21st century. You can see mostly in red, but some in purple. Can you imagine, the depth of the trauma that our people carry, not being able to relate and to fulfill those original agreements, to care for the land, and to sing those songs, and to do all of those things. But against all odds, as we bring back to those original words that I had said, about those ways in which our ancestors tucked away those seeds of remembrance and resilience into, the earth of our bodies, into those cellular memories and the bloodlines of memories. They tucked that knowledge deep away so that at some point we would have the courage and the capacity to allow those things to flourish into a beautiful garden. What you can see here is a representation of how our ceremonial cycles and our agricultural cycles are one and the same. As we begin to pick up the pieces of those scorched earth policies like the Sullivan campaign, we recognize that as Indigenous peoples, as Mohawk peoples, it is vital for us to have the seeds in hand and begin to, relate and connect in with the seeds of our ancestors and the foods of our ancestors, because they're our greatest teachers, right? So you can see here the calendar as it goes around. It actually goes around counterclockwise, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But our ceremonial cycle follows that. And the beginning of our agricultural calendar is not in the spring when the seeds sprout, but it's now, right? It's the time when the seeds are dreaming. It's that time when they're, slowly thinking about what's to come. It's that midwinter. It's this time when we pray for the good harvests ahead. We're always thinking in that mind of thinking ahead into, what's to come. And all of these markers around the calendar, they align with some part of the agricultural calendar because that's a part of our cosmological blueprint, that we can't be Mohawk people unless we tend the earth and plant the seeds, that's a part of who we are intrinsically. We dance around, elders say we dance around beans like corn. How many of you have ever grown the Three Sisters or grown some sort of polyculture? Well, the beans grow beautifully up around a sunflower stalk or a corn stalk, and if you ever notice, they always grow counterclockwise. They will always grow in that same way. And it's said that our people will always dance our round dances in the same way that beans dance around corn, right? Because they're our teachers. We listen and we learn to them in that way. Our women, we carry our seed songs, and we plant our seeds by the moon cycles. In our creation story, that beautiful grandmother moon that sits in the sky is actually original woman, sky woman, who upon her death upon this earth rose as a beautiful luminous face into the sky, who was to guide the cycles of birth and death and rebirth from time, onward and forever. And so we believe that the seeds and the songs that accompany them, we have these beautiful songs that sing praises to every single part of their cycle, of their life cycle. We sing to them in that dark night of the soil, and we grant them the courage to be able to break open and to sprout into something never before seen, right? And we sing that beautiful breaking dawn when they're breaking through the soil, and there's that beautiful moment. We all know it, right? We're farmers. That inhale, that beautiful time when those seeds are sprouting. We sing to them when they're stretching towards the sun and when they're flowering. We sing to them because that's a part of how we continue to care for them and to be reminded of the mystery and the magic that we have been gifted to here on earth. And we keep those cycles of planting with the moon. And amidst all of that, amidst the scorched earth policies and the colonization and the acculturation and the boarding schools and all of the weapons of mass distraction that we have, now at our fingertips with our young people, these teachings and these ways of living have stayed alive. Why? Because they're in our blood and our bones, right? And when we eat these foods, we enliven those memories. We enliven those teachings inside of our body. Many of you know about Three Sisters polyculture and farming, this way of growing foods together. Many of our varieties have been selected for this particular amazing, beautifully productive and benevolent system of agriculture since the dawning of our creation story. And it's told to us that our creation story never ended. That every spring when those gardens become fertile again and the soil bursts and blooms with all of this beautiful crops of corn, beans, and squash and our sustenance, it's said that that's just a remembrance of that original sprouting of those crops coming from our original woman's daughter. And those seeds have been selected in that very specific system of the beans going around the corn. We have these beans that I have here, these Mother Earth beans. These were said to be the original beans that sprouted from original woman's daughter's body, from her hands. And these beans, and many of our Haudenosaunee beans, they only grow about maybe 3-4 feet because they don't overtake the corn. Many people grow Three Sisters and they grow these big wild pole beans and they tear down the corn. But they were selecting the varieties to grow at a specific height. They were growing corn that had these big long shanks that would, these big long stems that would protrude out from the plant, which in industrial agriculture has been bred out because we want, the most efficient, productive corn that can be harvested through a combine. But the reason why our ancestors selected for those long stems was because the corn would still receive the pollen when those beans were growing around her, right? So there is this indigenous plant breeding that's been happening since that dawning of time and this co-evolutionary dance that's been happening. And the corn that we ate today at lunch, the autophylle corn that's been carried here, is said to be a descendant of the original peoples of this land. The 8-row corns were ancestrally connected to this very land, to the Haudenosaunee people, all the way across to the upper Missouri, to the Iroquois, the Mandan, and the Hidatsa. Those people, my ancestors, have been cultivating and stewarding that corn for a long time before it ended up here on our plates, right? And so how are we continuing to contribute to uplifting the amazing brilliance and contribution of indigenous farmers and plant breeders, and stop the erasure that we see in seed catalogs all the time that says that, we're just looking at Norman Rockwell's picnic, in Iowa, where all of a sudden white people have corn and have beans and have tomatoes. Why aren't we continuing to trace that back and give the honor where honor is due to the indigenous plant breeders who gave so much over countless generations to ensure that we have these foods here today to eat? So much of this work is about reestablishing relationships. It's said often in the communities that I work in that if a tribal nation wants to truly be sovereign, we must be able to feed ourselves, right? That the food is critical. But I wanted to take it a step further, because it's not just about economic sovereignty, and it's not just about political sovereignty, and it's not just about our freedom, right? It's the fact that we actually can't be indigenous peoples without our relationship to these foods, right? They are so intimately interwoven into our understanding of who we are. And from times past into times now, they have shown up in beautifully reverent ways. This is an old, before the cooking pots, the metal cooking pots came to our regions, we had clay pots that we cooked in. And you can see the texture on the side of that pot is from rolling a cob of corn just like this onto the clay. So you can see that beautiful texture of the cobs, and you can see the seed motif in the top. We still have people, now that we're having this resurgence of food sovereignty in our community. I have a good sister named Natasha Smoke Santiago who's revitalizing in our community the old ways of making these pots again. These baskets here are woven specifically so that we can ashlie our corn. We can wash our corn into masa and hominy and pozole. And so they're woven for very specific purposes. We have beautiful ways of braiding our corn so that we can store it for future generations. We're also beginning to be at a time of language revitalization, cultural revitalization, where we're starting to bring our rites of passage and our initiation back. And part of this, you can see some of our daughters there with the aunties and uncles surrounded. This is called the Mother Earth Garden. And as a part of Ohologo, which is our traditional rites of passage that we are bringing back into our communities, we actually plant the Mother Earth Garden. We replant that version of that creation story so those children, it will be written on their hearts forever, this story. Because of what Nephi was talking about earlier, that beautiful multi-sensory way in which we re-indigenize, right? We can't think our way out of this mess we're in. It has to be a multi-sensory experience that our children experience from when they're in our womb, that they know the flavors of home, that they know the smell of the cooking pot from home. So this is a ceremony where before the young women and men go out to fast, they actually plant the garden in the spring. And the young men are asked to prepare the earth. They're asked to prepare the earth in a good way. And to be in the shape of that original woman's daughter's body. And you can imagine a bunch of 12 and 13 and 14-year-old boys, they make a beautifully voluptuous garden bed looking like, this woman, right, with beautiful breasts and nice curves. And then the women come in, right, these young women, and they plant that story alive. Because these seeds and these stories, they go hand in hand. They're inextricable. This is a picture of one of my elders and mentors, Norton Rickard, who I spoke about before. And in closing, I'm gonna play through a few slides that are really an honoring song, and I'm gonna share a few words over the top of it. But I wanted to share this particular picture, which is an interesting place where we have the dovetail of interesting allyship and interesting fellows along the path. There was a man named F.W. Waugh who was an ethnographer during the time of salvage anthropology. And if you don't know what salvage anthropology was, they believed that indigenous peoples, just like myself and Nephi and other peoples in this room, were going to be extinct at a certain point in the 20th century. And so there was this big rush to go and gather all of the artifacts and things of indigeneity so that they could put them in museums, because this was going to be, that we would want to keep their stories alive in these spaces. And so F.W. Waugh went up into Mohawk community and began to sit not with the men, but he began to sit with the women and began to talk to them about the seeds and the foods and the recipes and all of these ways. And he wrote this book called Iroquois Foods and Food Preparation. And when I was 18 years old, I found this book in like the top corners of the UMass library. And in the back of this book were these plates, these like Technicolor pictures, like retouched for color. And these became this blueprint for this scavenger hunt that I began to take these around to elders, and that photo of like bringing these seeds back to life and saying, this was in 1900 that he gathered these seeds. And I began to put these plates in front of elders, and they began to say, oh, so-and-so has these seeds on their shelf, or I remember my grandmother used to cook these beans, or, there's that power of that sensory of being able to look and see. And so I always somewhere wherever he is, F.W. I always thank him. He's like my interesting old dead white guy who helped me along the path of my finding the seeds of my ancestors. And, really catapulted me onto this pathway of really apprenticing myself to these seeds. And in this work, we have founded the Indigenous Seed Keepers Network, where we do seeds, we continue to uphold the practices of seed stewardship in a cultural context. How are we continuing to honor those original agreements? How are we thinking about the cultural dimension and reflection of biodiversity? I want you guys to think about that. I want you to think about all those seed catalogs that are streaming into your mailboxes and all the, shiny, beautiful websites, some with good intention, some with bad intention, holding all of these amazing seeds of the world, right? Why is it that there's so much diversity on the planet? Why is that? As a seed keeper myself, I know it would be much easier to just keep one corn alive and one type of bean alive. But this is the cultural dimension of biodiversity, because we know as people of the earth that our resilience and our capacity to live well upon the earth is rooted in diversity, right? That this diversity is key to any long-standing sustainable system is diversity. And so we culturally encoded it, right? We need a blue corn for a naming ceremony. We need the red corn for the marriages. We need, a particular multicolored flint corn for the children's ceremony, right? We encoded it into our culture so we wouldn't forget, right? Because we humans, we're awfully forgetful, right? We're awfully stumble our way through this life. And so we encoded this beauty, this need for diversity into our ceremonies so that we could remember to keep those agreements alive. And so I want you to think about that. I want you to think about when you plant those seeds, the corns that you grow, the beans that you grow, the tomatoes. I want you to be curious. I want you to be thinking past the stories that are written in those seed catalogs. I want you to go a step further and be tracing those indigenous origins of where those seeds may have come from and why they're so beautiful. This is some pictures. This is what seed sovereignty and food sovereignty should look like. The woman on the side. Don't we want that kind of joy in our movement? Don't we want that kind of food system where we have our hearts centered into it, right? So many people talk about sustainability as something, the ecological sustainability or the economic sustainability. But the only way that we're going to truly make this a revolution and we're going to see the world that we know is possible is if we put our hearts into it. Is if we love the children, if we love the seeds as children and as mothers, right? As we have that beautiful heart connection. This is my daughter and another chef, Sean Sherman, and we say it's not child labor, it's passing on tradition. So that's the world, in my world. Kids are working alongside us, right? Because it's important for them to know, this work. We're working into seed rematriation. We're working interculturally with institutions like the Field Museum, Seed Savers Exchange, the USDA Seed Bank to take those seeds where they've migrated either through violent theft and biocolonialism and or by mutually beneficial sharing from indigenous communities to non-native communities. They have oftentimes been left into these seed banks outside of our communities. And as we begin to revitalize our capacity as indigenous peoples, as we begin to compost the traumas and the past failures and begin to make a welcome space home, we are inviting those seeds back, right? And the spirit of those seeds is asking us to call them home again. And so there's this grand rematriation that's creating spaces that help us to heal the adversities of colonization and acculturation and ask us to sit in very sometimes uncomfortable spaces, but also joyous spaces to see the way in which true allyship can happen beyond land acknowledgement, right? The real allyship that needs to happen. With all of you who are farming and stewarding, how are we leveraging our resources and our capacities to help these people? This was a beautiful rematration from the Seed Savers Exchange seed bank, this Taos Pueblo squash that had ended up in that cold storage. I'm like on like seed liberation team over here. I'm like, we need to get these seeds back out there, back into their communities of origin, in the daily soil of our lives, because they're not just dead inanimate objects that can be cut and spliced in these gene banks. They're living, breathing relatives that want to be home in our communities. I mean, look at these beautiful photos of these women caressing the squash. This is what the revolution can look like, right? When we work together to plant a beautiful garden that can feed and nourish. We're working on regenerative models of, economic models that align with our cultural values so that we don't create food sovereignty efforts that are dependent upon the nonprofit industrial complex, that are, dependent upon outside, funding sources. How can we create economic models that are indigenous by nature and restore those kinship routes and those trade routes? And in so doing, we are healing intergenerational historical trauma just by the nature of getting our kids' hands back in that soil. There's no greater healing capacity than our Mother Earth to take in our tears, our pain. You don't know how many times I've sit in circle in community and bring these seeds out, and you start to feel that same energy when I was 17 of that pain, that longing of why were these seeds and foods and these lifeways taken from us? But we restore agency. We restore capacity for people to take these seeds back into their hands and restore these beautiful relationships and really, truly show that food is medicine, that those foods will go inside of our bodies and rehydrate those original agreements and all of those things in our blood and our bones. So we're working in the Hudson Valley cross-culturally to strengthen these networks. Tomorrow we'll talk a little bit about the Native American Seed Sanctuary Garden and the reparations and reconciliation roundtable that we'll have. But you can see that we have people of many backgrounds and tribal affiliations and lineages coming together to grow beautiful gardens, to build capacity, and to leverage resources in an act of reconciliation and reparations. And tomorrow we'll go deep into that in the roundtable, because it's not just granting back land. It's not just giving checks. We have to do the deeper work, right? We have to do the deeper work of grieving and apologizing and changing the power dynamics and investing in indigenous peoples and asking them to sit at decision-making tables when it comes to land reform or land access or seed stewardship and all of these things. We need that representation, because we are creating a culture of belonging in our food and seed systems. And indigenous peoples know what that looks like, right? We know what it looks like. We know what it tastes like. We know what it feels like. So invite them into these spaces. So here is a beautiful, I'm just going to go through these quickly. These are the seeds that our ancestors and are the seeds that would have been grown here in the earth beneath your feet right now. These are the beautiful seeds that are a memory landscape. They are a record of the coevolutionary dance between the people and the seeds since time immemorial. They are a love poem to all those yet to come. They hold the living prayer of our ancestors inside of them. These beautiful seeds that are coming back to life. That red corn that I showed you earlier, that had come down to one cob in the hand of an elder. One cob. And then he took that seed and planted it and began to share it out. And last year we grew a crop in the Hudson Valley of 3,000 pounds of that particular corn. And we're able to share that back with our community, which is amazing. So I'll just sort of scroll through these because we want to have some time for Q&A. But these are those Mother Earth beans. Those were the original beans that sprouted from our creation story. And each and every one of you, the feeling that you have, I see it in your eyes, that remembrance. The invitation that I share with you is ask yourself that same question that I asked myself 23 years ago. Who were the seeds and foods that fed my ancestors? Because the disease of whiteness that is so plaguing the United States right now of people having this phantom limb of not knowing where they come from, right? But they long and they ache for that connection and are sometimes misguided and turn into appropriation, or in that grief of disconnection do unspeakable things, right? The things that we are witnessing right now with borders and walls and, the genocides that continue to happen. Largely that's in part to people forgetting who they are and where they come from. And they act out in unspeakable ways. So I think the real revolution starts here with the seeds, right? It starts in every single one of our hearts, where we can begin to sort of peel back those layers of hurt and trauma, and we begin to see who were the foods that fed my ancestors. And I know that each and every one of you descends from people who had intimate and beautiful and storied relationships with food and seed. And so I invite you, as we walk away from this time, as we eat our food tonight, due to the generosity of a seed we will all eat tonight, that you think about that question long and hard about the seeds that fed your ancestors. And I hope maybe by the time we all gather next winter, maybe you'll have a bundle of seeds to carry into this room together, right? And so in closing, these are some beautiful faces of some of the people who've been so generous. I have the honor and privilege of being able to come up here and speak. I have the honor and privilege of being able to write love poems and honoring songs for seeds in all the ways that they've helped me. But the only way that I could be the woman I am standing here on this stage, who makes her life in that way to speak and advocate on behalf of seeds and our people, is because of the countless joy and wisdom that our elders, our living elders, and our ancestors left for us, right? I do not stand alone. I stand in a circle, and I stand upon the shoulders of countless individuals and humans who did so much, who got up, day after day amidst the struggles to do what must be done to feed the children and keep the seeds alive, right? So I pay homage to all of these people, and this is what Indigenous resilience looks like. This is that original plate that was taken in 1912 to 1915, and these are the corns and seeds that are still alive and thriving and being grown in my home community. This is what Indigenous resilience looks like, right? Amidst all of the adversities of the last, many decades and centuries, that our people knew that the key to our healing and thriving, again, was to keep the seeds alive, right? And so I'll close with these words. We carry our nations with the same love that we carry our children, our seeds, our songs, our prayers, our original agreements. It is our capacity to love fiercely, to defend what we feel most deeply connected to, that will bring about the revolution of the world that we know in our hearts is possible. As we work to remember, to pull together the threads of memory and story, the wisdom of our ancestors, we are again reminded, care for the seeds as though they are your children. Care for the earth, for she is your mother. And make yourself into a vessel into which the wise voices of your ancestors can echo. And so in the honor of the grand lineage of seed keepers who came before us, I hope that each and every one of you could close your eyes and make renewed commitment to care for seeds of your ancestors for those yet to come. Danito, thank you. You guys got some questions for me? This is the fun part. I went a little over. I was just getting going, I was like, all right, I'm like, seed church, Yeah, get on my pulpit. Hi.
Testing. Hi. Who has a question?
I'll keep going. No.
Hi, my name is Samir Mahadeen. I'm here with my wife, Kristen. Our farm is actually off of Skinny Atlas Lake in Onondaga County. I have indigenous blood in me as well. My mother's from the Dominican Republic, Taino. But I wonder, and I think about this, is what would the Onondaga people, what would they like to hear, from people who've come to their land and are going to live off that land, and we're committed to doing whatever we can to, doing the work we're all here to do. But sometimes I wonder, how would they want to be approached, or what would they want to hear, or what can you do to outreach, the indigenous community that you're located in, and build a relationship and build something that provides, some of that sustenance back to them.
Yeah, well, I think you probably answered your own question, which is building those relationships, right? And I can tell you what not to do, which is to, insert your privilege in a way that continues to perpetuate the violence of white saviorism, right? And that happens so often, right? Tomorrow we'll go through a little bit of the steps of what I feel like is the right approach to, I know Angie and Roger over at Onondaga, we have a lot of good friends there at Onondaga who are doing incredible seed work, incredible work. You're revitalizing the seeds and foods of their people. But it is really a process, right? It's really about how are we going with humility into those spaces? How are we decentering our voices? How are we allowing the truth-telling to happen? How are we allowing the grief of that truth-telling? How are we sitting in that grief as outsiders and not, spilling white tears and having the violence of not being able to sit in those uncomfortable spaces of recognizing kind of the violence of settler colonization. Colonization is a process. It never ended, folks. It's still happening, right? Every single day that we live here, we're still seeing it move forward, right? And continue to express itself in, as Nephi was talking about earlier, in all kinds of insidious ways, right? So how are we allowing the truth-telling as the first part, and then how are we going in there with ways of apologizing, ways of centering their voice, ways of investing, ways of allowing representation in spaces where they might not have access to? How are we allowing for that relationship building that comes with time? That sometimes this stuff might not happen quickly, right? As a non-native person coming into a native space, I'll give you a couple tips. Have a good sense of humor and have a thick skin, right? That's it. You got to come and you got to humble yourself, and you got to say, you might have all these tools and have all these ideas, but sometimes you got to check that at the door, right? Sometimes you got to check that and just say, what is it that you need? What is it that I can help you with? How can I be of service to you? How can I decenter my own ego and my own needs in all of this and just show up, right? And that's when the real reparations can happen, because if we don't do all those other steps ahead of time and we just jump to step 8, that's when it becomes transactional, right? That's when it gets weird, right? So we need to do that work so we can flip the compost. It's compost, right? We're farmers, we know that process. We can't just have high-speed compost. We have to allow, that work, because this is deep healing work, right? So I would say there are lots of ways to connect to the people that are doing the real work in Onondaga or wherever you farm, really making that connection with them. But go into it without an agenda, go into it with just how can I show up and, and really be of service in this space, with, the bigger intention of just allowing that healing to unfold. So yeah, that's my quick and simple. We have an hour and a half to talk about it tomorrow, so folks might want to come to that roundtable and dig in a little more. But I'll allow for more questions if there are any. One way in the corner.
Oh, hi, there's one in the corner over here. I'm going to bring the mic over.
Perfect. But if you want me to connect you to Roger and Andy, I will. Angie, I will. Yeah, they're doing really good work there. Yeah.
Hi. Was there any seed breeding or selection alluded to in the stories you were told?
I think it's just inherent in the. I don't think that it was very specific techniques, but I think it's just the stories that involve the 3 sisters and them growing together and all of that. But I can't think of any very specific thing. But so much of indigenous knowledge is encoded, right? It's not it's metaphoric, right? It's the deeper layers of the memory landscape where that knowledge is sort of, hidden in. Because there are actually beautiful, people will say, oh, there's a creation story. And like for every person that you sit to and talk to about the creation story, there's like a different version a little bit, because all of those things can happen all at once. And so there are really beautiful parts of our creation story and in the way that some people tell it in these like long, immense, beautiful ways, where they talk about the migration of corn coming from the south, coming from the southwest, coming from, those different places. So it's really beautiful to see also the beautiful anomaly of like our scientific knowledge of how corn came from Oaxaca and came through the Southwest, and then we got it through the upper Missouri River Valley and then across, and the way that it went that way. And the beautiful anomaly of us saying, well, that's only been maybe about 1,500 years that our people have had corn, except for simultaneously, it's been with us since creation, right? Because you have to think of indigenous time, right? You have to think about the ways in which our creation stories had to continue to shift and change to continue to meet the things that were coming into our life, because culture's a verb, right? There's not just like one version of the story and this is how it always is. It's always changing, right? Just like the seeds themselves, right? And that's, I think, the most important part of what you bring up in that question, which is seed selection and breeding, which is that, a lot of the times, especially in communities where they're starting to revitalize agriculture and food, like plant breeding gets a real bad rap because we think about like genetic modification. But what we can do is reclaim the honor of that co-evolutionary dance that our people have been in with since the dawning of time, is that we're always changing those seeds and we're always changing, those foods in that way, right? There's this really beautiful, dynamicism, I guess, that's a part of that. And how do we continue to encode that knowledge in the stories as we move forward? Because a lot of our stories also have been, there's been parts that have forgotten. But what I say is that how can we continue to add new layers to the stories as we move forward, right? To create those kind of ancient futures that we know are possible. Yeah. Take one more question? Mike?
Hello, Rainbow, they, them. I had a real question about how you bring ceremony to the farm. That's something that I've been really, feeling very challenged by, is, knowing that there's all this ancestral wisdom as a native person, Sloggy Bear Clan. Mm-hmm. That's me. But, how do I rematriate that relationship to the land? Because I really feel so disconnected from it in a lot of ways.
Yeah, a good place to start is, I can't, it's also personal, it's like every person has their own way, and I can't tell you the way that you can do that for yourself, because for every person it's different, right? But what I would say to that, I guess, I'll just reframe the question a little, is that ceremony happens every day, right? We want to fetishize it, and there are really powerful ceremonies that happen, but there's really beautiful everyday ceremonies that we partake in, right? The fact that, I carry a seed song that comes from the Anishinaabe people, and it talks about, the words say, Maji ishka, mani dumines, ashkena minubima dizuin. And you're approaching that plant and you're saying, come in your own time, sacred seed. I humbly implore you that you would bless us with good life, right? That you would be in our life. So just by the nature of saying those words, or a version of those words, to the seeds that are in your garden and in your farm, changes the power dynamic, right? It's not we come from a culture that's rape culture, right? It's control culture, that I'll harvest when I want to and I'll have, the final say. But when you start to sort of relate in that everyday ceremony of approaching the plants and asking permission, right? Consent culture starts to sprout again in our lives, right? When you start to approach the seeds and ask them humbly that they might bless your life, right? That's something really powerful, right? And many of the people in this room probably don't have seed songs that they carry in their bundle, and they can't go to their mom and ask them what those things might be. But there are ways that we can begin to engage in those relationships, even if we don't have those. Even just saying those words to the seeds themselves is a powerful step in the right direction, and how we reintroduce ourselves in right relationship to the land, to the seeds, to the foods, to the ancestors, and all of that way, right? It starts little. It starts very little, and then it begins to build. And I mean, I think you're asking the question on behalf of an individual, but there's bigger ways that we restore these things to our larger community. I feel very fortunate to come from people where the ceremonies were never lost, right? The ceremonies always stayed. It was just that people might not necessarily have been planting the corn anymore, but they knew that the ceremonies were important, so we kept them going. And some people kept those seeds, alive and going in small amounts. And then as we build our strength and our vitality and our capacity, we really make those ceremonies come to life in ways that, many in this lifetime haven't ever seen before, right? So I don't know if that answered your question, but yeah, it's a hard question to answer. But I pray for you and your people, and I hope that, that you continue to do that deeper work. And I also, send that same prayer out to all of you, that you would continue to have beautifully storied relationships to your food and seed, and to be able to see yourself as a part of that coevolutionary dance, and that we all sit here tonight because we love the work that we do. We wouldn't do the work. We wouldn't be out there on, 100-degree days and, weeding, we got pig's weed up to our, waists and, doing all this work if we didn't love what we did, right? And so the work now is how can we continue to do that work in an alignment with, some of this, what I like to do, and I praised Nephi for doing this earlier, is how are we normalizing this in these spaces to talk about spirituality and culture and connection in that ways, when so much of these conferences tend to be so heady and intellectual and scientific, right? That's a colonial violence in and of itself, right? Is to continue to have that be, the norm. So how are we continuing to be courageous to normalize, this layer of the conversation of how culture and spirit intersect with our agriculture? And how can we continue to embody that to be not only responsible descendants, but good future ancestors? Because each and every one of you is a future ancestor. So what is it that you're going to do that has that fragrance that lives beyond a time of your own? What is that you're going to do? You guys are all doing amazing work, I'm sure. But how do you continue to make that be your everyday prayer and ceremony? And that's about it. I'll leave it at that. Yeah, so reach out.